those SEC college football power rankings, according to the SEC Network, ESPN power rankings. 1 through 5, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Auburn, Florida. And then 6 through 10, number 6, A&M. Number 7, Kentucky. Number 8, Missouri. Number 9, Mississippi State. Number 10, South Carolina. And then 11 through 14 in the SEC. Number 11, Ole Miss. Number 12, Arkansas. Number 13, Tennessee. And number 14, Vanderbilt. Now, power rankings, what are they? Who decides? I think it's interesting to just see it and see them shuffle, week to week. And I couldn't help but think about head-to-head matchups, right? Like if you had Georgia at number 2, LSU at number 3. Well, what if those two played each other right now? How would you feel about that game? You have Mississippi State at number 9. You have South Carolina at number 10. What if those two played each other right now? How would you feel about that game? I like to look at it in those terms. And maybe we'll kick it around a little bit now with Chris Doering. Y'all can follow him on Twitter at Chris Doering. He is a former Florida Gator All-American receiver, played in the NFL, and now an analyst for ESPN and the SEC Network, and you see him in the studios on SEC football weekends with Coach Gene Chizik. He's on your radio right now. Chris Doering, welcome to the show. Chris, hope your Tuesday's going well. You don't ever get tired of talking football, do you?
No, man, this is the thing we live for, right? All year long we're talking about it. Now we actually have real on-the-field things that we can debate and recap and look forward to. So this is a fun time of year for guys like me and you.
Yeah, it is. Did you have some input on this SEC power rankings that the SEC Network put out there on Twitter today?
No, well, here's the thing, man. I put my own out on Sundays, and it's funny listening to you say, what exactly is a power ranking? As you said that, I start thinking, I don't even know what it is. I put one out every week, and I'm not sure the criteria. Here's the criteria that I hold it to, a little behind the scenes. After our Saturdays in the studio are long for us. Coach Chizik and I are in there at noon, and we leave. We're off the air probably about 12:30 to 1 o'clock at night. We usually go somewhere, try to decompress, maybe have a beer or two, and then all of us, on-air talent and the folks behind the scenes, we kind of just get together and compare notes from the day, and we rank these on our phones, and then we debate them and talk them over a couple pops, and it is true. It's like, all right, what's the criteria here? Is it that we're looking at the year-to-date record and who teams have beaten, or is it if we thought they were going to play one another, who would win? And I think there's a little bit of both. Dari and I actually got into a little bit of an argument the other night because he felt he had Florida down around, I want to say 7th or 8th behind Missouri. I was like, bro, Missouri lost to Wyoming a couple weeks ago. Now we're going to forgive them for that? And so I do think it's a little bit of, obviously, opinion-based, and until these teams square off, we won't really know, but it creates a lot of good talking points for guys like me and you.
Yeah, it really does. And I like it because it forces me to think about if teams played each other. And what I do is I get caught up every week, and I only have time to think about the games that are actually coming up. And so this was fun, Chris, and I'd like to kind of ask your thinking, because I did the same thing. When I saw what the SEC Network put on their Twitter account, they had Georgia number 2, LSU number 3. But the first thing I did is go, all right, if those two teams played each other right now, I actually think in my gut I'd be pretty confident LSU's going to win that game. And then I look at your rankings, and you agree with Alabama 1, but you've got them flip-flop. You actually have LSU at 2 and Georgia at 3, so you must feel the same way.
Yeah, I do. I think in my thinking, I believe that going to Texas, going to Austin, winning that game, that creates a little value. I think as long as for Georgia, that's one of the things 3 weeks in, we probably have talked the least about the Bulldogs and know the least about who they really are, because they haven't been tested to this point in time. And quite frankly, they've flown under the radar a little bit. That's ironic to say when we're talking about the number 3 team in the country. But there are some questions that I have at this point about them. I believe in their offensive line. I know the run game's really good, but do the 12 sacks that they have so far this season, how legitimate are those? I mean, I saw my alma mater have 15 sacks in the first 2 games, and then go out and basically get shut out against a very good Kentucky offensive line on Saturday night. They got 1, but that was when Jonathan Grenard was left completely unblocked. They didn't do much against that. So how good are those 12 sacks that Georgia's gotten to this point in time? What are the receivers that are stepping up? Blaylock and Pickens. How good are those guys? They haven't gone against SEC type talent yet, so they're putting up some numbers and look pretty good to us as of now. But really, how legitimate are those things? So I think there's some legitimate questions about Georgia, even we're basically being a month into the season so far.
Yeah, Chris Doering on your radio right now. Y'all follow him on Twitter. Go check out his rankings. He put them out on Sunday, power rankings for the SEC on his Twitter feed. It's at Chris Doering. And then you can compare that to what the SEC Network put out this week. So everybody's high on Kentucky and should be. Have them at number 8, one spot ahead of Mississippi State on your list, Chris. What are you seeing from Kentucky that impresses you?
Yeah, I think the thing that I like about Kentucky are the lines of scrimmage. And I made the comment yesterday on our show that I know Kentucky's not into moral victories. You heard multiple players talk about, hey, that game was not good for us on Saturday night just because we came close. That's not something that this program measures by these days. Moral victories is a thing of the past for Kentucky. But I take a couple things from it. The offensive and defensive lines are legitimate. That's one of the most important things, as you would agree with me, I bet. Mm-hmm. In this conference, if you're going to be competitive, you got to be big, strong, physical, athletic up front. And after talking to a few of the offensive linemen from Florida, that's exactly what they went up against. Not that Florida's been able to run the football very well in any of their 2 previous games, but really had a hard time moving those guys because of just how big and strong they were up front. And then offensively, man, that offensive line, I think when it's all said and done, people are going to put Kentucky amongst maybe the 2 or 3 best offensive lines in this conference. I know that I'm not as qualified to talk about O-lines as maybe Cole Kublik is, but I know he's high on those guys as well, and just watching them negate what had been a pretty good pass rush for Florida on Saturday night leads me to believe even further that's one of the best lines in this conference.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just they're big, they're veteran, they're physical. On that note, they're about to go into Starkville. State just played Kansas State, who was big and veteran and physical on their offensive and defensive lines. And for a couple or 3 quarters in that game, State kind of got pushed around. I was going to ask you what you think about State, but as you talk about that, kind of how do you see Saturday going in Starkville between State and Kentucky?
Yeah, that's one of the things that was most surprising to me. And, Matt, I know you probably can speak to this even further and more in depth. But, after watching Mississippi State go to Manhattan last year and just physically dominate on both lines of scrimmage, be able to run for the, 240 yards plus or whatever it was they ran. More than that. I think Kylan Hill himself had about that many. But whatever it was a large output, and they dominated on the offensive line. And then defensively, we know that defensive line is not the same as it was last year in Starkville, but to see K-State have the success running the football the way that they did, it was surprising that there was such a turnaround from last year to this year in the way that the game played out on the line of scrimmage. With that being said, I thought I saw a much more intent focus on running the football in the third quarter. If you go back and watch Mississippi State, they held the ball for over 11 and a half minutes. Kansas State only ran 8 offensive plays in that quarter, and the majority of where the production was coming from was being able to run the football a little bit more. So I was a little confused as to why it didn't happen sooner in that game, because I think that's something that this Mississippi State team has to be able to do, especially in circumstances where Stevens was not having his best day to that point in the game. So I think it's going to be a great challenge against Kentucky. I think when it's all said and done this season, that Kentucky's going to be a much better team than maybe the media thought they were going to be in the preseason. We may not know all the names that they have on particularly the defensive side of the ball, but you're starting to see some of those guys step up. Josh Pascal, maybe a great story about coming back from his battle with cancer last year, but he's actually a really good, productive player on that side of the ball. DeAndre Squares stepping up next to Cash Daniel at the linebacker position. Wright, the number 15, the outside linebacker that filled the holes for where Josh Allen was last year. So there's some players that I think we're going to know a little bit better after the season's over that we may not know here at this point in September.
Chris Doering on your radio right now. Y'all follow him on Twitter if you don't already, at Chris Doering. If you're watching the stream, it's right over my shoulder right there, so take a screenshot and go look him up. Chris, State had a couple of key drops in their game last week. one that is a drop in the middle of the field gets tipped up for an interception to a safety. Another is a drop in the fourth quarter that would have been a conversion, but they drop it. So 2 key drops, really the first time all year they've had drops by wide receivers. You played the position. Why do some, I guess, units from time to time seem to get a drop thing or theme or bug in the room going? Why does that happen? Because we assume that if they're at this level, they can catch a football. Why do you think that happens?
You know what? I don't know exactly. I mean, for me, that was the one thing that always came easy to me, catching the football. And catching the football is not just hands. It's more so eyes. I teach younger kids all the time about looking the ball in and being focused on that first and foremost. I think a lot of times guys are more interested in trying to get upfield to make yards after the catch, which are important, assuming you actually catch the football. The Guidry interception, or the one that bounced off Guidry's hands that was intercepted, was over the middle, and it takes a certain type of receiver to be able to be consistent in that type of traffic. The game may have changed a little bit with the way it's officiated, and some of the hits you take over the middle maybe not as great as they used to be, but it's still an intimidating thing for a human being to be able to focus on the football while you feel those footsteps around you. I feel a little guilty too, Matt. As you know, I've been critical of those receivers in the past. In the offseason, I caught a lot of heat from Mississippi State fans. And after watching them in the first couple games, I felt, all right, well, maybe they are coming along. Maybe these stories are true about their improvement. And I actually talked on Friday night on the show on SEC Now about the impact that Coach Johnson has had on them and coming in there and creating a relationship with them and holding them a little more accountable and those guys getting in the books a little bit more. I'm not ready to bail on them yet, but it was a little disappointing to see them take a step back after hearing all the stories in camp about their improvement and then seeing it in the first 2 games of the season.
Chris, appreciate your time. Got one more thing I wanted to just ask you. When you watched South Carolina versus Alabama, and obviously Bama much better, they pull away. But South Carolina at times are pretty doggone competitive in that game and made some plays and got some stops. Were you impressed with them? Did you think you were going to see that from South Carolina in that game?
I was impressed with them for a couple reasons. First off, I had a chance to go down to Columbia a couple weeks before the season and watched, I think, their final scrimmage. I saw Ryan Helinski at that point in time and said, wow, this guy seems like, for a freshman, has a great understanding of the offense, where to go with the football, makes quick decisions, gets the ball out of his hand, which I think is something that obviously is important in the style of offenses that are being utilized in college football today. Secondly, I was even more so surprised that they had so much success against Alabama after watching that second half of the North Carolina game. I mean, really, if you go back and watch the tape, there was a lot of people wanted to blame Jake Bentley, but there were mistakes being made all around Jake Bentley. Offensive line busts on protection, receivers dropping passes, different things that contributed to the overall struggles. But they seem to have overcome that against Charleston Southern in the second game of the year, and that kind of carried on. I look at Helinski as a guy similar to Bentley, who is a natural kind of leader, brings great energy to the team, is always trying to get everybody around him up. And so I do think that this offense is better than maybe what they showed in that first game of the season against the Tar Heels. But to do it against Alabama's defense, that's another thing. I thought the game plan was really good. They utilized a bunch of quick passes early, kind of negated some of the pass rush that Alabama is typically known for. But I think, it says a lot about South Carolina. I think it actually might say a lot about Alabama, where they are, too. We talked a lot on our show this morning about the prospects of them having 4 freshmen playing in their front 7. It's going to be one of the biggest challenges that Nick Saban has had with his defense, and the fact that South Carolina rolled up close to 500 yards of total offense, I think even further illustrates that point.
No doubt about it. It's going to be an interesting, maybe a different kind of run to the finish than we've seen in recent years, and I look forward to it. Hey, Chris, thanks so much, man. I really do appreciate it on a Tuesday, and good to talk to you, and we'll be watching this weekend as usual. Thank you.
Matt, anytime, man. We appreciate you coming on the show all the time as you do, and I'm happy to repay the favor anytime you need me, man.
Great. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon. All right, that's Chris Doering. Y'all follow him on Twitter at Chris Doering. It's Doering. So give him a follow. Does a really nice job. And you can see that list. I was talking about the SEC Network power rankings that popped out there on Twitter earlier today had Alabama 1, Georgia 2, LSU 3. Chris had Alabama 1, LSU 2, Georgia 3. And I think he's right. You get credit for beating Texas and Austin and putting up all the points on offense and look good. And we don't know a whole lot about Georgia right now. We don't feel like we do. And Chris has Mississippi State at 9, Ole Miss at 11. The network had State at 9, also Ole Miss at 11. Kentucky ahead of both. How about that? I know this song, Roger. Y'all stick around.
The only way they know how. That's just a little bit more than the law will allow.
You're listening to the Matt Wyatt Show.